thank Tim and obviously Jim and Change Board for inviting me, and also thank the lady who yelped over there. I'll see you later on for your £5 for that, in such anticipation. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I have had an opportunity to also hear a great deal of the other speakers this morning, and of course, I've also browsed the distinguished group of people who've come to listen to the many ideas that are being shared on this platform. Now, I'm told that my time will come on there, but it hasn't yet, so I hope it does soonish so that I know where I am. A huge amount, in particular when we heard from Matthew Syed this morning, was about, obviously, technology, about innovation, about how these things work. But of course, all of these issues need to interact somehow by us, the human beings that are dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. I want to start this morning, or this afternoon rather, by telling you a little bit about me. I then want to just sort of say a few words about this issue of social mobility and what it actually means in the society that we currently live in, and the kind of enormity of the challenge that we face. And then hopefully I'll end with a few ideas of mine that will leave you thinking a bit more about this issue from potentially a different perspective, in a way that perhaps, I hope, you've never thought about it before. So a little bit about me. I was born in Kenya to Somali parents. My mother gave birth to 12 children. I was number 8. I was absolutely grateful that she didn't stop after number 7. I wish she'd stopped after number 8. But I grew up in a semi-slum for the first 9 years of my life. Both my parents were never formally educated. And at a particular moment in time when I was 9 years old, my father had died in a car crash. We were originally from Somalia, and originally were supposed to be going back there, and the war had broken out at around the same time. And we found ourselves in a place where we are trying to make sense of the senseless, having helped to just bury your father with a mother who cannot read and write, and in circumstances that were quite dire, if not intolerable. And as it so happened, there was a huge movement of people in the early 1990s of Somalis seeking asylum all over the world. Some of my siblings ended up in America, some ended up in Canada, and some of us ended up here in the United Kingdom. And imagine then for a moment turning up in London in the early 1990s, having to just help to bury your father a couple of months before, not understanding a word of English, not understanding anything about the culture, without your mother, and without any understanding of what it means to be living in this new environment, carrying with you this deep trauma and this lack of understanding of how to make sense of the present, let alone what kind of future you're likely to hold for yourself. And I mean, again, it's hard to explain that really in its entirety without fully being able to do it justice for a 9-year-old boy to have to deal with all of that through no fault of your own. And again, I say that because it doesn't make me any particularly special, really, because that's the story which was in many ways remarkably unremarkable for the vast majority of people who were fleeing war, people who were fleeing death, and fleeing a particular set of circumstances that was breaking out in that particular region of the world at that particular time. 25 years later, here I am now as a barrister and a broadcaster. I was very lucky to do a law and undergraduate degree in French. Went on to Oxford to study for my master's in a full scholarship. Then went on to the bar to train as a barrister, again on a full scholarship. And then, of course, now having the opportunity to broadcast on a number of occasions and quite regularly on the BBC, and in particular BBC Radio 4. Now, so many people then say to me, well, it must be smooth sailing from here onwards. And I say, well, there's still plenty of time to fuck this up. That will no doubt have helped with the digestion of the food. But I'm going with what Matthew was talking about this morning about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. In so many ways, I'm still trying to understand and interrogate what's happened. What is it about me as opposed to my many siblings who are scattered around the world, who have done not so well as me, or some who could have done better than me that didn't? What was it about the fact that I didn't necessarily have any discernible advantage over any of them, and yet here I am doing what I'm doing and trying to figure it out? Now, again, I am absolutely content with and comfortable with the fact that I don't have all the answers, but I have some ideas about what it all means. And so I've also been very lucky in relation to working on a book that will come out next year on this issue of social mobility and some of the ideas that I've been discussing with you, which I hope to flesh out in the book as it comes out later on this year or early next year. But it's essentially an appraisal, looking at my own life as an experience, but also trying to understand what it means to be born into a particular set of circumstances, and then trying to figure out a way in which you can better yourself and those around you with a view to growing, never feeling as though you're fixed at one point, with a view to actually making a difference. And so I have the opportunity, obviously, to test some of those themes and ideas with you today. And so forgive me if I don't necessarily go into the kind of granular depth that I would like on some of these themes and some of these ideas, but fear not. This time next year, my book will be available right here, and I will make sure that Jim invites me back so that I can sign copies. But what are those themes? Some of the themes that I've come to understand is so, for example, this idea that somehow in this country, often the dream that we sell people is if you work hard and you do the right thing and you sort of push yourself, you're going to succeed. Everything is going to be fine. This bootstrap mentality is just simply bogus, and we need to stop talking about it, and we need to have a different conversation. Again, I'm giving you the headline points here, and I'm happy to delve into a bit more during the Q&A or otherwise. The other idea that somehow this is a zero-sums game, that for some of us to win, there has to be others who lose. Again, this is just not helpful to the conversations that we need to have. There is plenty to go around, but we just need to figure out how best to harness everybody's talent in the best possible way. Another issue, which I obviously would not say this to a different audience, i.e. a school or group of children, but the notion that we tell all of our kids that they could be whatever they want to be when they grow up, that they can aspire to be a footballer or a barrister or whatever, it's just simply not true. We know that. But somehow we have not been able to confront that issue in the most sensitive way without necessarily killing people's dreams is another conversation that we need to have. And also at the time when we are sort of faced with an issue of identity in a way that any debate that we have now has to be broken down to individual components. Well, there's not a black person here, or there's not a gay person here, or there's not a woman here, or there's not a black gay Muslim woman here, or whatever it might be. I feel, although it's helping in some respects to get the conversation moving, I genuinely believe that we're losing sight of a bigger picture of a challenge that faces us in a way that we need to get our heads up and look beyond the horizon rather than looking closer to where we are, or in some cases, navel gazing. But the scale of the challenge we face is also immense. I'll give you 4 particular issues that are linked to the question of social mobility, and in particular for your benefit on the issue of employment, recruitment, diversity of thought and ideas. When so much of your destiny is determined by the people to whom you are born, the circumstances in which you are born, and the kind of environment in which you are raised, why are we surprised that therefore by the time you're 5, 10, 15, so much of your destiny has already been decided for you. And why are we so obsessed at trying to find a way in which somehow it's for universities to resolve that issue, or indeed for employers to resolve an issue whose source of problems lies far down the line, behind where you are standing? A holistic approach is much more sustainable, but we end up having these silo conversations about the issues before us. Another issue that I tackle in the book, 80% of potential employers, 80% admit to discriminating against people based on how they speak. Now, if, for example, you have worked everything that you could do and do well and push yourself and come forward, and the person in front of you has a particular mindset that has decided that they're going to attach your competence with how you speak and how you express yourself, how much progress have we actually made? I've spoken to so many HR managers and recruiters who say to me, well, Hashi, I'm happy to hire this guy or this girl, but I can't put them in front of the clients. How many of you heard that before? Again, how much progress are you making if what we're dealing with are issues that are deep down, embedded in people's minds, when actually we think we've made progress? Another issue, a recent book by some amazing professors at the LSE who I interviewed for the book, talked about something called the class ceiling, where they've argued that we have obsessed over access and entry levels at the expense of ever not properly understanding the issues of retention, still less about progression, and how much of your class origins basically sticks with you even if you've managed to overcome so many of the hurdles in your life, both in terms of your qualifications and your aspirations. These are some of the challenges that we face. And so, again, thinking these things through, when I reel off some of the things that we're looking at, blind name CVs, non-graduate schemes, people saying that we don't necessarily have to have, so many of the big graduate companies are talking about we don't necessarily need degrees anymore. Better interviewing ways of doing things. But, you know, when we're looking at the issues of government and/or institutional reforms, when we're looking at the gender balance and race, and there's all these incredible amounts of initiatives that are taking place. But if we think about the humanity of all of that, these initiatives don't necessarily just function in a vacuum. They function out there in a society. They function in a context where we all have our own unconscious and conscious biases. They function in a situation where you cannot divorce a target by a company, an aspiration by an organization, from the very context in which it is applied. I'll give you one simple, staggering example. Recent British social attitude survey found that 44% of people in this country, 44% of people admitted to believing that certain people from certain race and ethnicities were born less hardworking. 44%. I featured this in a documentary I did for Radio 4 last week. 44% of people actually believe some races and ethnicities were born less hardworking. Now think about that. If you're a manager, if you're a recruiter, if you're somebody who's sitting in a very powerful position, and that idea is in your mind both consciously and unconsciously, you're less likely to hire properly, you're less likely to retain people, you're less likely to help them progress further, you're less likely to want to actually help them get on. So again, I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, if we are coming down on an issue where everybody wants to do something, and I really genuinely believe that, despite these kind of statistics, I honestly, strongly believe that the vast majority of people do want to do something different. And I also believe that the current climate in which we're living is a time when genuinely it's a moment to harness. But we harness that moment at our peril if we execute it badly. We harness that moment in a clumsy way if we don't fundamentally understand what it is we're trying to do, but why as well. How is also just as important as to why. Concluding on this, about a couple of other thoughts in relation to what we're looking at in social mobility. The question of social mobility, for me, when you look at my own story, I'm an outlier. It isn't a story that can be easily replicated. It is a matter of circumstances, some talent, and a lot of luck. I'll leave you with one thought about luck. When you're cycling, and this is from a professor at Cornell University, Robert Frank, who says when you're cycling down a road and you've got the wind blowing in front of you, and you're cycling against that wind, you're constantly aware of that wind pushing you back. You're always aware of your bad luck. But the moment you turn a corner and it's a slight incline and the wind is behind your back, you're much more likely to believe that it's all you. You're much more likely to be like, it's me who's riding this bicycle so fast. You forget all of the other factors that are around you. Don't get me wrong, I'm not shrinking violet. I know about my own talents, and I'm not trying to undersell myself. But it's a fact of life that we are all beneficiaries of a level of luck that means we are where we are today for a multitude of reasons beyond just you. So think about that the next time you're recruiting somebody. Think about that the next time you're trying to widen your pool. And so thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I promised I wasn't going to cry for this because I got my suit on. I can't mess up my suit, but you nearly had me. Ladies and gentlemen, we haven't got much time, but I think it's only right that I give you the opportunity to ask Hashi a question after you were so generous in sharing his story. Is there anyone who has a question they'd like to pose to him about him, his journey, social mobility? There's a young lady at the back here. You've grabbed the slot.
Hi there. I'm really interested to hear more coming from someone who's really wrapped up in identity and whether I'm black or Muslim, all three. What can you say a little bit more about moving beyond the navel-gazing thing that you just said?
Yeah, I'll do that because I'm also keen on getting a couple more questions, so I'll do this very quickly.
We might not have time though. I appreciate that.
There's a chapter in the book in which I called it Imagination, and it's a chapter that sort of says, in order for you to be able to fundamentally, transform your life, do well, and actually aspire to beyond where you are, one of the critical questions you have to ask yourself is just settling these many factors about who you are, why you are, where you are at this particular moment in time. And I phrase it in a way where I say the sooner you can get on of settling these questions, the sooner you can get on with the business of getting on. And that is important because as somebody who will have many labels, the black guy with a Muslim name and who's grown up in deprived circumstances, refugee, or went to a state school, whatever it is, these are the labels that you have to deal with as a society. But if you're a minority in a room, you don't necessarily fundamentally understand how other people might not be able to relate to you, but you stick out because you are who you are. But if you're there in a way, and I think for me anyway, at the bar, it's a profession in so many ways, which is probably one of the least egalitarian professions to getting there. But once you're in there, it's one of the most meritocratic because once you're in front of a judge and you're in the public, you look at your opponent and you say, if you don't know the answer, I do, and I'm going to eat you alive. So in that sense, it is in many ways quite a meritocratic profession, which fills me with huge amount of confidence. And if a judge disagrees with me, he or she has to explain that in writing, and it better make sense, because otherwise I'll appeal it. And so that, for me, is quite interesting in a profession that I'm in now, that I, for example, couldn't have worked for anyone. I knew for a fact from early on that I'd be a crap employee, simply because I wanted to be in a profession where I thought how good I am would determine how far I could get, which is where the bar for me is where it's at. I didn't want to be, this is how good I could be, but also how much sort of brown-nosing could I do. And that for me is also quite critical. But the title of the book is People Like Us. So look out for that early next year.
Fantastic. So before the round of applause, because I think it's only right because you have come along and shared your incredible story and been so generous with that. How can people connect with you? Because that's going to be the important follow-up. And when is the book
Absolutely.
scheduled?
So, well, I'd be more than happy to connect with many of you. I'm on the app. You can tweet at me if you like. I'm going to stick around for a bit longer this afternoon. So please don't, feel free to get in touch and talk about, all these issues. The book is also set up in a way that it follows what you would expect a linear life. The person to whom you're born into, to whatever fulfilling kind of life or career that you're seeking to achieve, and what exactly is happening to you at each stage of your life that means that for some people, they're able to get on quicker in our society, and what is it about other people where there are constant barriers that present themselves both directly, indirectly, consciously, and unconsciously that allows for our society to be where it is now, where a disproportionate number of people seem to be at the top and a disproportionate number of other group of people seem to be elsewhere. So that will be next year, very early next year, and you'll, I'm sure, see some sort of publicity somewhere at some point.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, massive round of applause for Hashi Mohamed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.